freeze machine. It's interesting. It's a slight into whistle.
An airframe from the Hangar 11 collection at North Weald in Essex. Its authentic colours, the classic red tail scheme of one of the most illustrious of all wartime US Army Air Forces fighter groups, specifically the 332nd Fighter Group, which became known as the Tuskegee Airmen, otherwise referred to as a result of the colour scheme as the list of the Spanish license-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine version, the Hispano HA1112 Bouchon. And here they are from the left, both trailing smoke, having apparently already been set upon by an Allied fighter. German pilots operating with Franco's nationalist forces. They first started operating the Bf-109 there in mid-1937. French Hispano Suiza engines, but they suffered all sorts of problems, especially overheating, and only the 25 German-built fuselages were equipped with those units. Then a later Hispano Suiza engine proved rather underpowered. Only 65 aircraft were so equipped with that. It was then that the Rolls-Royce Merlin entered the equation, and procuring the Merlin solved two problems for different Spanish manufacturers. Casa used them to power their license-built versions of the Heinkel HE-111 twin-engine bomber, and Hispano employed them for the Bf-109. They carried on serving with the Spanish Air Force until the mid-1960s, when it was thought that perhaps the Bouchon story had come to a close. But not so. A large number of the ex-Spanish Air Force Bouchons were brought together for the making of the movie Battle of Britain airframe. The Messerschmitt Bf-109G and the Focke-Wulf FW-190. It really did prove a significant match for them, and that much was proved during the Battle of Kursk in July to August 1940.
No pressure, yeah, when he sits on the
touching down then, Bob Davey with the Yak 3 UTI PW, and as it taxis in you'll get a good chance to see the fact that this aircraft is paying its own small tribute to other events of recent months, with its Soviet wartime red stars having been replaced with Ukrainian insignia. two of the UK's representatives in the Red Bull Air Race World Series. Now we move through the eras to the only jet aircraft in our weekend's flying programme, but again a very appropriate one. And one of our international contributions for an organisation that's done a huge amount to support the British Airshow circuit in the last few years, coming from overseas with a British-built classic jet. The reason I say this is an appropriate aircraft to have in our show this weekend is because it's really our sole specific representative of the Royal Air Force at the time Queen Elizabeth II came to the throne in 1952. The following year, in mid-July 1953, the new Queen undertook her first ceremonial review of her Royal Air Force. And among the hundreds and hundreds of aircraft that were assembled in the static display and the flypast at RAF Odeon in Hampshire were a very significant number of Vampires, because this aircraft was one of the mainstays of the then frontline Royal Air Force. And in tribute to the late Queen, the Norwegian Air Force Historical Squadron has painted on one wing of this single-seat Vampire a black wing band in salute. And here it is. The design was originally known as the Spider Crab for obvious reasons, before the name was changed to the perhaps more flattering Vampire. The reason for that twin boom layout is interesting. We're talking the very early days of jet engine technology here, and the idea was to make the jet pipe on the engine shorter and minimise the loss of thrust that would have been the case with a longer jet pipe from the single engine. Don't forget that the previous jet designs to enter service, compared with the Vampire, Britain's Gloucester Meteor and the German Messerschmitt Me-262 in the fighter role, were both twin-engine types. Had a lot of experience of wooden airframes. The Vampire structure has a mixture of wood and metal. That fuselage pod up front has a core of balsa wood with layers of birch veneer, both inside and out. The wings, the tail booms and the tail itself are all metal. The early Vampires were strictly day fighters. They came into use with the RAF in 1945, just too late to see service in World War II. But in the early post-war years, aircraft like this notched up a whole raft of firsts, including one by our greatest ever naval test pilot, Captain Eric Winkle-Brown. He used a modified Vampire 1 to make the world's first ever landing and takeoff on an aircraft carrier by a jet aeroplane on the 3rd of December 1945 using HMS Ocean. As Sally B climbs away past the American Air Museum building here, we recall the fact that it's 25 years since the American Air Museum was inaugurated at IWM Duxford in a ceremony for which Queen Elizabeth II was present. And on the walkway up towards the American Air Museum can be seen a glass sculpture, a glass wall, entitled Counting the Cost, which has on it the silhouettes of all of the American aircraft, mainly the US Army Air Forces, but also some of the US Navy, that were lost in operations from the UK. In 1942, American forces arrived on British soil with the silhouettes of each of the aircraft concerned. Is really quite humbling. It's in tribute to all of those servicemen and more on the Allied side, to which tribute is paid by the sole airworthy B-17 flying fortress in Europe. And Colin, watching it over Duxford, a US Army Air Force's fighter station, of course, allows us to recall the presence of the Americans, not just here, but across the whole of East Anglia with the 8th Air Force.
Yes, the impact of the arrival of the 8th Army Air Force must have been quite something here in East Anglia, which back in the 1940s was a very remote part of England. The only Americans that those people will have seen will probably have been those stars of the silver screen. And some of them, in fact, became locals because Clark Gable, probably the most famous, possibly the most famous actor of all time, back in 1939 when he was in Gone with the Wind, suddenly he is based here in East Anglia. And Jimmy Stewart as well, of course, was another man who became part of the 8th Army Air Force. Most of those guys, you have to remember, were only 19, 20, and the action took part in the skies over Europe, about 20,000 feet, something like that, in temperatures of minus 30 degrees. The windows were open, the wind would be howling through, and you would be fighting the cold, let alone the enemy. Fighters. The development of radar-controlled artillery certainly had a dramatic effect on the losses that the 8th Army Air Force and indeed the British RAF suffered. Was really, really dramatic. It's worth remembering, or it's a coincidental thing really, that the first attack was conducted by the 8th Army Air Force from Grafton Underwood up near Kettering, and the leader of that flight was actually Paul Tibbets, a name that would be familiar to you because he went on to pilot the Enola Gay, which at the end of the war dropped the bomb, the atomic bomb, on Japan. And that first raid to marshalling yards at Rouen in France took place 80 years ago this summer, involving B-17s. Indeed. And those early raids were actually quite successful, and there was a lot of optimism because the conditions were almost perfect. However, it became a different story when they attacked places like Schweinfurt in Germany, where particularly the German fighters had learned where the weak spots were on those B-17s, and they did take a terrible toll. 20,000 Allied or American servicemen died as a result of activities by the 8th Army Air Force and the 9th Army Air Force in Europe. One of the aspects of the daylight bombing raids, of course, was that they were aiming for precision bombing. Their training largely in the clear blue skies of California. They would use the Norden bomb site and get really good results. However, in Europe, we've seen what conditions can be like. You know, the weather conditions are nothing like California, and also getting attacked by the artillery, the flak and the German fighters certainly reduced the success of those raids.
Yeah, we need to emphasise these were daylight bombing raids. Unlike RAF Bomber Command mainly striking by night, the 8th Air Force was attacking by day German industrial targets, transport and resupply networks and so forth. Power plant it was, because we're going to see it powering a twin-engined light bomber and long-range fighter, and two single-engine types, one of them a high-wing monoplane Army cooperation and special operations aircraft, the other a biplane fighter. In fact, what was the last new biplane fighter ordered for the RAF, also the RAF's first ever fighter with an enclosed cockpit. from our left, the Bristol Blenheim 1F, leading 2 examples of the Westland Lysander 3A, and bringing up the rear, the Gloucester Gladiator 1. But these, of course, also aircraft we see in this display because of the key roles they played in the Royal Air Force of the early part of World War II, not least during 1940 itself. And these are all, of course, incredibly rare, airworthy specimens. The Blenheim, the sole flying example of its type anywhere in the world at present. There are only 2 other flyable Westland Lysanders the world over. These are the only ones in the UK or Europe at present. And the Gladiator is currently the only one flying, but hopefully we'll soon see the Fighter Collection's Duxford-based example back in the air. And wouldn't a 5-ship Bristol Mercury formation be quite a treat in future? Bristol's chief engine designer Roy Fedden. It's a 9-cylinder air-cooled radial. Radial meaning, of course, that the cylinders are arranged in a radial pattern around a central crankshaft, as opposed to an inline engine with banks of cylinders on either side. A very versatile power plant, obviously, reliable but prone to what was known as a rich cut if the throttle was opened too abruptly from low revs. For example, if there were a need to undertake a go-around rather than a landing. First to break from the formation is the Gladiator. Aircraft is always nice to see at Duxford because its predecessor, the Gloucester Gauntlet, was one of the types flown from here between the wars by number 19 Squadron, and was indeed the aircraft that was replaced by the new Spitfires when they arrived in the summer of 1938. Quite a lot of history's notable aircraft have started life as private ventures, and so it was with the Gladiator. Gloucester's design team developed it without a particular requirement to bid for. But as the RAF's new monoplane fighters, the Spitfires, Hurricanes, Bolt and Pull, Defiants and so forth, were delayed, the year when war clouds really began to gather in Europe. There was the Munich crisis, which thankfully didn't at that point result in hostilities, but which did see RAF Fighter Command being called to wartime readiness, and many of its previously silver-winged biplane fighters, like the Gladiators that we've just seen, taking up a much more warlike appearance with the application of camouflage. 19... The Hurricane 1 then breaking off, leaving the Spitfire 1A, the Wildcat and the Hawk orbiting in front of us.
We'll try to go.
At 26 that evening, a large number of German aircraft were engaged in bombing objectives in the area of the Thames estuary. The squadrons, the Czech Republic and Slovakia, the Czech Air Force for many decades. Bringing them in from either end of the display line for an initial crossover. My 35 from the left, my 171 from the right. From the 221st Helicopter Squadron, the HIP from the 222nd, both of them stationed at nad Oslavu in the Czech Republic. And quite apart from the World War II historical connection. This is the first time that we've ever seen Warsaw Pact era combat types in action as a Duxford air display in service with a military arrow. And this is a really innovative to one another. centre, we see the crew flying the Union flag from the open rear loading ramp in their salute to you. The largest and longest production run of any helicopter in history and still counting, used across the Soviet Union for military and civil roles throughout the Soviet sphere of influence as well. The Mi-17 was given more powerful versions of the Klimov TV3 turboshaft engine. In excess of 12,000 of those, including Mi-171s like this, have been built. Under that fuselage can be carried an underslung load of around 3,000 kilos. There's a winch in the right-hand door which can further upgrade in process by the domestic manufacturer Lom Praha. In for a break. Crewing behind, we have as pilot Major Václav Sparček, with co-pilot Captain Martin Mięcil and flight engineer Warrant Officer Jan Suchanek. In the hip, meanwhile, pilot Captain Tomasz Svoboda, co-pilot First Lieutenant Tomasz Dostal, the flight engineer is Warrant Officer Lumir Vashinka, and the door gunner was Warrant Officer Radek Nezvadba. We'll be seeing the Hind in action again as a solo act towards the end of today's display, but now the two coming in for landing, and really some historic moments over IWM Duxford. I've wanted to see these two shapes over this skyline for so many years, and I'm delighted that it's finally proved possible this year.
easy, but in fact it's very hard to hold station in such lightly loaded aircraft. The slightest of uplift or downlift just goes and blows you around like a bunch of crisp packets. And they're working incredibly hard. This is an amateur team, but they fly to a truly professional standard. And indeed, they are winners of the 2019 British Air Display Association's trophy, which has formerly been won by the Red Arrows. I'd like to talk about the last three members. Last but definitely not least, mobility. Now it was an untruth firing through the propeller with synchronized mechanism. That was for the Persian military, for counterinsurgency. And indeed they experimented with attaching 8 20-pound bombs underneath the fuselage if Hitler had gone ahead and invaded England. It was just a format.
Well, it is, but you know, and I think, well, you're supposed to be
The team has also made a flight to Switzerland. It actually involved 6 flights to get there and 6 flights to get back. That's made a couple of years back. I'm sure we'll be invited again. Now get your eyes up on them. They're coming up, building up height. Get your cameras ready. They're going to dive towards you in a moment for the bomb burst. Definitely worth a photo. Breaking now. Now 911, the Moth Major doing a half Cubanate. It'll fly to finish it off. And with the outbreak of war, de Havilland went and concentrated on more serious aircraft such as the Mosquito or indeed the Vampire that we saw later. And so the production of Tiger Moths in the UK went to Morris Motors, the car manufacturer at Cowley near Oxford, and they made 3,400 of these aircraft. Absolutely nearly it. Look how close they are.
So they've got a lead of 40. We're going to go back to 55. So I say the result is still on the table for that one.
Indeed, just bear in mind when you're watching this aircraft, so fast is it in this display, and indeed it looks so much quicker than any of the other piston fighters we've seen in today's show, that it's being flown here for display purposes at a relatively conservative cruise power setting. So this is nothing compared with this aeroplane's, or relatively little compared with this aeroplane's outright performance when absolutely wound up. Brian Smith taxiing back to his parking slot in the Corsair. In over the threshold comes the Bearcat, which was one of the first aircraft acquired by Stephen Gray in setting up his fleet of historic aeroplanes, which became the Fighter Collection, which always takes such pride of place at Duxford Air Shows. Pete Kinsey, their chief pilot, at the controls of the Bearcat. Now, before we continue with the rest of the display proper, we've got a departure slot for a number of aeroplanes to get out. We're going to be sticking to the original timing, so we're going to get people underway in a fairly leisurely fashion before we pick up the programme with our next act at just after 20 minutes past the hour. And also in this slot we're going to be getting the Hangar 11 P51 off to North Weald, and I think about half a dozen or so of the Tigers of the Tiger 9 will also be heading home. Alone, you can get to see the colour scheme that's been specially applied to this aeroplane. It comes from the 221st Helicopter Squadron based at Náměšť nad Oslavou, and that unit, or rather that base I should say, specifically today holds the traditions of the only Czechoslovak manned bomber squadron to serve as part of the RAF during World War II, number 311 Squadron, which operated first the Vickers Wellington and then the Consolidated Liberator. So, painted on one side of the hind is a depiction of a Wellington, on the other side a Liberator. Significant assault lift capability as well as attack attributes. That began to change when the Soviets started using these helicopters operationally and again refined their tactics, particularly as a result of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 to 80. The Hind was very successful, but they changed the concept of operations, making less use of its transport capacity. As for the Czechs, well, Czechoslovakia started using the Mi-24D model 40 years ago this year. Mi-24Ds were received from 1985. They even used to mount a quick reaction alert, QRA, air defence capability against slow-moving targets during the Cold War days. 62 Hinds were delivered between 1982 and 92. When Czechoslovakia broke up at the end of that year, 34 of them were carried on into service with the Czech Air Force. And then, in part payment of a Russian debt to the Czech Republic, 10 new Mi-35 models like this were taken on in 2003. Used for close air support and combat search and rescue missions primarily. 17 of them now still in service with the 221st Helicopter Squadron. final bow of an excellent display sequence. Pilot Major Vaktav Spadek, co-pilot Captain Martin Miensil and the flight engineer Warrant Officer Jan Suchanek, together from the 221st Helicopter Squadron of the Czech Air Force for the last time in the UK with the Mil Mi-35. And a very fitting tribute by the Czech Air Force at Duxford this weekend to their forebears who flew from this airfield in 1940. I mentioned earlier how it was at the then International Air Tattoo, now the Royal International Air Tattoo at RAF Fairford, that we first began to see the lights of the Czech Air Force appear on the display circuit after the fall of the Eastern Bloc. Well, the man who remembers those days with great affection, I'm sure, and perhaps with the odd other memory, with some of the difficulties that can be involved, is the man who is currently our flying display director here at Duxford, Jeff Brindle, a man of great experience on the display circuit. As a former RAF Lightning display pilot, he later took on the running of the flying displays for the air tattoo shows and did so with great aplomb. He's been our flying display director here at Duxford since the start of the 2017 display season. Jeff is retiring after this show. We wish him a very happy retirement. He's one of the great gentlemen of the air show circuit. And Jeff, we thank you for all you've done here at Duxford. Firefight display today goes on, and running in over the motorway, the two examples of the Beech D-17S.
I use an app called Easy Watermark, but I don't know if you can get that on Android.
Walter Herschel Beech was already a prominent aircraft designer by the time he set up his own firm in 1932. He co-founded a company called Travel Air with two names that may be familiar, Clyde Cessna and Lloyd Stearman. It was with an old colleague from Travel Air, designer Ted Wells, that he conceived the Model 17 as a fast executive transport as his new company's first design. It was quite a gamble at a time when the Great Depression had already taken hold, just 3 years after the Wall Street crash. But Beech saw the potential, and it rapidly became known, following its first flight in November 1932, as the Stagger Wing, and you can see why, with the upper wing being positioned slightly behind the lower one. Had excellent aerodynamics right from the start, very clean surfaces and a sleek outline. The aim was for a range of 1,000 miles and a top speed in excess of 200 miles an hour, with 5 seats including the pilots and plenty of luggage space. When it first came on the market, the base model cost $14,000. To give you a comparison, at the time in 1932 America, a normal house cost somewhere in the region of $6,000. Perhaps it was no wonder that sales were a bit tardy to pick up, but soon the Stagger Wing came to dominate the market, attracting There goes the first of the Spitfires, the Joker, the aerial speed icons. Mark 14. Leading off the Duxford Big Wing, as we're calling it once again this weekend, will be, of course, IWM's own Spitfire 1A N3200. An aircraft with another of those incredible stories behind it. As we were saying earlier, shot down on its only operational sortie over the Dunkirk beaches on the 26th of May 1940. Covered by the shifting sands, but later recovered, subject to an outstanding rebuild here at the historic Flying and Aircraft Restoration Company facilities. And this Duxford Spitfire veteran has the honour of leading off our big wing. Hurricane 1B of the Shuttleworth collection bringing up the rear. And I shouldn't neglect also to mention one of the most distinctive aircraft in our Spitfire section, the Silver Spitfire. While the 20 aircraft formation forms up, we're now about to be entertained by the Spitfire 14E. And here it comes, over the American Air Museum, from our perspective, from the right. Germans had severely underestimated the RAF's strength. Every year, to commemorate Battle of Britain Day, following on from the initial phase of the Battle of Britain, from the 12th of August 1940, the Luftwaffe's focus switched to destroying the RAF, its fighter stations, and the new Checkpoint Ray exposed his invasion plans. 3,000 or so airmen, officially credited with involvement in the battle, including those from 15 overseas countries, will forever be known as the few, after the memorable phrase spoken by Winston Churchill in the Commons on the 20th of August 1940. Today, it heralds the arrival from the left of our very own Duxford Wing of Spitfires and Hurricanes.
The gratitude of every home in our islands, in our empire, and indeed throughout the world, except in the abodes of the guilty, goes out to the British airmen who, undaunted by odds, unwearied in their constant challenge and mortal danger, are turning the tide of the world war by their prowess and by their devotion. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many.
This is clean. And into that tunnel, like, the way back and say we'll follow that.
Oh yeah. Well, it depends what they make it.
They're all tied down as well.
All your mates can come swim.
Ollie, where you going?
This way, Gary.
Get his own. He's all about getting 2 feet and taking me for a...
Now the rear elements of the Duxford Wing complete their landing roll, and as the front elements run back in towards the airfield for their brakes to land, we offer, with the national anthem, our final salute of this weekend to Her Majesty the Queen. That concludes the flying display at our 2022 IWM Duxford Battle of Britain Air Show, a truly memorable occasion for all sorts of reasons, and it feels only right to roll the credits on that Spitfire and Hurricane finale. Neil Parkinson was in Martin Phillips Mark 9. Dave Bullaston in MH415, the Mark 9 from Air Leasing. The two-seat T9s, Brian Smith and Large Ness in the two aircraft from the Aircraft Restoration Company. Steve Jones was at the controls of the NHS Spitfire from ARC. The Silver Spitfire from Spitfires.com was flown today by Andy Durston. Charlie Brown was in the single-seat Aero Legends Mark 9. Paul Stone flew the Shuttleworth Collection Mark 5 and Martin Overall. Max Alpha Aviation's Spitfire 8. And the four Hurricanes from Hurricane Heritage, the two-seater, was flown by Stu Goldspink and their Battle of Britain combat veteran R4118 by Mike Collett. Matt Pettit was flying Jennifer Taylor's Mark 1, and at the back of the formation we had Paul Shakespeare in the Shuttleworth Collection Sea Hurricane. Thank you to all the pilots, the ground crew and the operators. And with that, the Spitfires and remaining Hurricanes taxi back, and we close our show for this weekend.
And just a reminder that you can watch the show again by subscribing to Planes TV, the live broadcasting for this weekend on their own channel at planestv.com. 1 month subscription costs you £10, where you can watch this very show again and more than 100 other air shows and features from Planes TV's archive, a lot of it filmed here at Duxford. If you stay subscribed, there'll be a lot of other new programmes added this winter, including request shows. So that's the website again, planestv.com.
Now, there's no need at all to rush off after the end of today, and we have had, of course, a very substantial audience, so thank you to all of you for that. The exhibitions will be remaining open. Likewise, some of the refreshment outlets stay open until 7 p.m. But when you do depart from Duxford this afternoon, to reduce your queuing time, those of you who are parked up at the western end of the site, nearest the Land Warfare Hall and the American Air Museum, all cars in those car parks will be turned left when you leave the site. You'll find links to the A1, A10, A11, A14 and M11 on the outskirts of Royston, about 6 miles away. However, if you're parked in the north car park, over the road, the other side of the A505, all cars there will be turned left when you leave the site. We ask you please don't go round the roundabout at the motorway, but travel north to the next exit and then take the A10 route if you're heading to Royston.
Now, if you make your way to the airspace hangar, you'll be there in time to see the demonstration of the Concorde nose lowering. That is something that is particularly worth seeing. The Concorde, of course, is the prototype version, pre-production version, and it's on display in the airspace hangar. And that exhibition, organised by the Duxford Aviation Society, will be happening at 5:45. That's in about 20 minutes from now.
Want to have sort of an aesthetic then also it's genuinely an aviator. yeah, Matthew.